Welcome to this broadcast of Manufacturing Talk Radio. I'm Tim Grady, and I'm here with my co-host Lou Weiss, who is the founder of Manufacturing Talk Radio and also the president of All Metals and Forge Group. You can find their open die forgings and seamless roll rings at steelforge.com. Joining us is Anthony Nieves, who is the committee chair of the Services Report on Business from the Institute for Supply Management, to give us an update on the month of March and kind of how things look going forward. Anthony, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome again.
So I see another very positive report in the high 50s. Give us an update. What's going on? It's we're feeling it. Lou's feeling it at steelforge.com. What's happening in the world?
Well, as you said, we definitely had an uptick over last month's reading of 56.5 up to 58.3 on the composite index. And things are boding well for the services sector, similarly to what we're seeing on the manufacturing side. We look at business activity at 55.5, that's up ever so slightly. But what's really good news is seeing the new orders index at 60.1. That's the pipeline. That tells us what's in there going forward. And that's up 4 percentage points. Now we have two other indexes that round out this composite. And we know that employment drives this sector. It's labor intensive. We had contraction last month. It was at 48.5. We had a nice uptick of 5.5 percentage points, bringing it to 54%. Supplier deliveries continue to slow. That's always been, it's been an ongoing challenge. We know that demand is exceeding supply. We have logistical issues. However, things are easing just a bit in the supply chain. We're still experiencing some material shortages, capacity constraints. On the logistics side, things are easing up. What's notable, if you look at the ports out here on the West Coast, Los Angeles, Long Beach, we had over 100 ships in the queue offshore waiting to be offloaded. That's down to 42. Still up considerably from pre-pandemic levels, but definitely moving in the right direction.
One of the things that I noticed, Anthony, and we'll get back to some of your other numbers, but I just wanted to make a comment about in the report, you have your respondents are saying section. And I found it hard to find one that was positive. You want to address that?
Well,
in view of the numbers, the respondents aren't feeling it, or at least this group.
Well, they're highlighting some of the challenges they're facing. And, we extrapolate those comments from the committee members. We have hundreds of comments that come in, and we try to extrapolate those that are the prevailing theme from most of the respondents. And they have some uncertainty. If you look at one of the comments in the lead-in of the report, things are going better, okay? Things are good. They still have all these impediments and obstacles in place. And they have some uncertainty as it relates to what's going on over in Ukraine right now. So to your point, they may not look favorable, but again, overall, it's highlighting what their challenges are, not so much as you look at the numbers themselves. We know the report came in with some strength this month.
I've seen the R word being bandied around a bit, recession. Is that a headwind that we see coming?
It's potential. The potential is there. I think we'll see it hit Europe before here. But to your point, right now, if you look at the components that could cause stagflation leading into a recession, it would be what's going on business activity wise with GDP. The other would be the employment. And third, as we know, is inflation. Inflation strong, pricing pressure strong, wage increases are there, but we have low unemployment and we have GDP about 3% if you take our composite index and annualize it. And it looks like we're not going to see business activity wane in this quarter or next quarter. But to your point, some economists believe by year end, we could be experiencing a recessionary period. The question is it going to be a hard landing or a soft landing, if it is going to be any landing at all? And I think right now, all indications are we're still going to experience incremental growth moving forward. If consumer confidence gets negatively impacted by what's going on with rising interest rates, coupled with the costs that we know are astronomical for certain commodity areas, time will tell.
Anthony, I'm curious about, sorry, Lou, go ahead.
No, that's all right. I can wait for the California gas price.
I'm curious about employment, with national unemployment at 3.6%, historically very low over the last 40 years. We still seem to have a shortage of workers. The two don't register in my brain.
Well, you've had people leave the workforce that aren't even in those numbers, that are never coming back. And when you look at it, I just read something last week where it said that there are 2 jobs for every available candidate. So we know the labor pool has been restricted, and it's definitely in certain trades and industries. We know construction has been an ongoing challenge. We know truck drivers has been an issue, but now we're also seeing it in those tedious type customer facing positions, whether it be in retail or in accommodation and food services. People have choices, and they're trying to get into jobs where maybe they can have stability as opposed to longer hours, maybe working a combination of remotely versus, face to face. But there's definitely competition out there for good workers, and it's tough. It's tough to backfill all the open positions, whether it's baby boomers retiring, gray markets where people have become entrepreneurial and started their own enterprise and are not re-entering the workforce. There definitely is a lack of available workers out there.
I did hear recently, as a result of the Great Resignation, when people all of a sudden decided I can make more money if I go into business for myself. And we did have a record year last year and this year of people starting new businesses. But there seems to be a switch over where people are beginning to realize that opening your own business isn't as easy as they all believe it is. And there are people already beginning to shut down, go out of business, and will be looking for jobs again.
I would not be surprised by that coming to fruition. I mean, I went from a corporate environment to owning multiple businesses, and there's plus and minuses on both sides of that equation. In the corporate world, you have to deal with bureaucracy and hierarchy and everything else, and that kind of stress. And then when you have your own business, it's a different kind of stress. I find that both contribute to some sleepless nights, regardless of which side of the equation you're on.
Do drugs.
Anthony, the transportation issue has been dogging the country for quite some time. Any let up, any improvement?
Not at this juncture. I mean, we still have respondents telling us that there's a shortage of, trucks and equipment and racks and drivers and everything else. As far as the overall transportation piece, we know fuel costs and fuel surcharges are out there. The cost of transportation is up. Our respondents are indicating that they're getting those surcharges on top of commodity price increases. So it's a real interesting situation right now. I know fuel has come down a bit. I can't say that it's still at a palatable range of price, but out here in California, I think we just dipped under $6 a gallon on the high octane fuel.
Why don't you come on east? It's only a little over $4.
Yeah, but then you have a bunch of other issues you have to deal with.
That's true. That's true.
Always. So, Anthony, what are the real high points of this report, and what are the headwinds, if there are any?
Well, I mentioned previously about the new orders index up. We see employment up. Deliveries, as I mentioned, are still slowing. Inventories, we have some inventory replenishment, still not enough. It's interesting to point out that the inventories index of 51.7 is up 0.9 percentage points. But if you scroll down in the report and you look at the inventory sentiment, and that index is what our respondents are measuring there, is what they feel, how they feel their inventories match up to their business requirements. And it's 40.2, came off 15.1 percentage points. And what that's indicating is that they believe that as much as they've seen the inventories grow month over month, it's still not at the level necessary for their business requirements. So demand continues to outpace supply, and that's what's contributing directly or indirectly to, well, directly to the pricing index, right? The pricing index at 83.8, it's up 0.7 percentage points, 1/10 of a percentage point from matching the all-time high that we had back in December of 21. So that was at 83.9. So you see material shortages, demand is up, supply is down, capacity constraints. The war in Ukraine, which is also affecting chemical prices, natural gas, chip production, neon is one of the components that is affected by this. So overall, these are some of the highlights that we're seeing from the report, good and bad. But overall, you have to look at it in totality, that the services sector is still performing well.
Yeah, it's very strong. There is a statement in your report that the services sector has been expanding for all but 2 of the last 146 months, a 12-year run above 50. That's astonishing, I think.
Now think back, it was April and May of 2020, right, 2 years ago, right when the pandemic hit. It actually would have been 3 months because things locked down like that second week of March. And so that it didn't impact that month's activity until the tail end. And then that carried over into April and May. And then we had a rebound after that. But much of that contributing in those first few months of the rebound was the purchases of the personal protective equipment and other type of needs and requirements in healthcare and other areas to combat the pandemic and to implement protocol. But that's why we saw when everything diminished to such a low level those 2 months, again, measuring that change month over month, it was still a buildup coming out of that last May. And then we started seeing some record activity, as we know, back a few months ago. We had some pretty good highs in the composite index, setting all-time records. But now when you look at it, because again, I can't emphasize it enough that we're measuring this change month over month, you can only grow so fast and so long. And that's why I believe we're going to see this incremental growth going forward and not the huge spikes that we've seen in the past.
We haven't brought up yet, and I'm going to be the bad guy to do that. COVID, BA2. We don't hear as much about it like we were last year, the beginning of this year, the first year. It seems to be, now there's the second booster. Are we just getting accustomed to it?
It's a great question. And somebody asked me that earlier today on one of my interviews, and Europe's getting hit by it right now. And we aren't. We have cases diminishing. We have hospitalizations down, cases are down. We have the public health restrictions being lifted. We'll have to see where this goes in the next few months, what's going to be the guidance. And it's all contingent upon if this contagion takes a hold and impacts us. And that could be a little bit of, that could put us on put us off the tracks a bit there.
Interesting. I just came back from a trip to Florida, and of course, Newark, New Jersey airport, everybody is masked. The airplane was masked, and they were really, really stringent about the trick about putting the mask under the nose. So everybody was masked. As soon as you get to Florida, it's like they never heard of a mask.
Exactly. No, you're 100% exact on that. I mean, you know, I flew a couple of times since the beginning of the year, and definitely going on these 6-hour flights and having to sit for an hour and a half in the airport with the mask on, and then on the plane, and then once you deplane, and by the time you get out some fresh air, you're jumping in a cab or a Uber, and you have to put the mask back on again. And boy, I'll tell you, and it was nice to see it, some of the restrictions lifted once I was at destinations versus having to deal with it. But apparently this month, we're supposed to see the mask restriction lifted. Hopefully it doesn't cause any further spread of the virus. And if that's the case, so be it. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that if we do get a spike like Europe is right now, I can see us going right back to the initial protocol.
The number that I heard over this weekend was that the 60% of new cases in the United States is BA2. So it is beginning, even though it's not running rampant, the prior COVID seemed to be on the wane, but this BA2 seems to have legs now, but it's not as severe.
You know, my question is, and I don't know the answer to this, if we're ever going to be able to differentiate from these, you know, going forward, let's, you know, roll the clock forward or push the clock forward and say, okay, what happened to the traditional flu, or is everything COVID? We don't know. I don't know.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, tough one.
you get a head cold and you don't know.
Right.
Yeah. In your report, you always break down of all the industries in the service sector, what's expanding, what's contracting. What industries are seeing strength and what industries are seeing weakness?
That's a great question. I mean, you know, you have 18 industries that comprise this sector, right? And 17 of the 18 have reflected growth on the composite index. So it's and I'm actually, because I haven't looked at this in a bit, but when you look at the one industry that is contracting on the composite side, that's agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. But overall, everyone else is doing well across the board. So I can't beat that.
No, that's an excellent outcome. Any particular reason that industry is under strain?
You know, we don't break it down that way. I mean, as far as we can look at some of the comments and whatnot, but we know that part of it has to do with production, you know, especially on the agricultural side. So they have had some capacity issues in the past. So great question. Again, I'd have to really research deeper than beyond this report to figure that out. I will say that all 18 industries, unfortunately, said their prices went up. So, and we're seeing that across the board on everything.
Yes, and that begins to go back to Lou's point about the R word. In the supply-demand world, you can only raise prices so much before demand falls.
You know, initially when he said the R word, I thought he was talking about rationalization, because we can rationalize anything if we try hard enough.
Well, I'm glad I cleared that up for you.
Yeah.
I did see something, and I've been claiming this may be going on since COVID, about the pricing, that there is some price gouging, I believe, going on. And here's a very clear point. I was down in, as I said earlier, I was down in Florida, and I'm in a restaurant, and this was a cashless restaurant. And they would not take cash. And I guess it has to do with maybe employee theft, or maybe has to do with the fact that paper money carries the COVID, don't know. But then when you give them the credit card, and our metals business, we also take credit cards, and we're charged about 3% on the credit card. They were charging 7% on a credit card in a restaurant that wouldn't take cash. So I figured they're gouging 3-4%, maybe to make up for lost sales.
Well, I couldn't speak to that specifically because I don't know the restaurant, but I will say that I noticed during COVID that certain restaurants actually had a COVID handling charge because of all the protocol that they had to put into place as far as the PPE, the handling procedures and things of that nature. So I remember seeing that. But the merchants actually, it's the credit card processor and not the merchant that controls that percentage. So that had to be an additional surcharge.
Correct.
Yeah. And to your point about
otherwise known as price gouging.
Well, when you brought up the price gouging, what I found interesting is that there have been some comments to that. Certainly, we have whatever the market will bear, let the buyer beware, all that kind of stuff. But right. Here's the other thing. It was interesting. I read a comment from one of the respondents, and it said that profit margins have been maintained. So that speaks volumes to what you're talking about.
Well, I'd like the name of that person and find out how he's doing it or she's doing it.
Well, to your point, Lou, some years ago, I worked with Visa and MasterCard. They do have rules in place about what you can charge as a merchant. Some merchants push the envelope. I hope somebody from Visa or MasterCard is tuned in. They might want to look further into places in Florida that could be pushing the envelope on that charge. It's a bit heavy.
Well, in all fairness to the restaurant operators out there, and you have to understand, I come from that hospitality background, but when you look at a restaurant that's, say, operating at all cylinders are firing, their gross operating profit may be between 12 and 14% at best, right? So they have a food cost at, say, 30%. It depends on the type of service, whether it's a quick service restaurant, full, service, white tablecloth restaurant. But when you add in everything and to come up with all the work that goes into getting a gross operating profit of 12 to 14%, that's a hard way to make a dollar. And so with the rising food costs, commodity costs across the board, how far can they jack up those menu prices? So I'm not trying to condone any surcharges. I think any charges should not be, they should be transparent, and you should see what they are. You see it in the hotel industry where they have this so-called guest resort fee, and for all these services that many of us don't even use, and get charged and dinged for it. So you have to look across the board and see what the impact is. But I think that restaurant business is such a tough business right now. That's why the fatality rate for the restaurant industry is so high. It's just a real low margin business.
Yeah, you were lucky to get out of it.
Oh, believe you me, if I was in it during COVID, I don't know what I would have done.
Yes. Yeah, the mortality rate jumped significantly. I think it's normally around 50%, isn't it, Anthony?
Well, I remember statistically, we were looking at this when I was back in the day, when I was in college, and this was when Moses was on the tablet. And, I looked at the rate of restaurants, 4 out of 5 close after their first year. And then the balance of those, 4 out of 5 don't make it to the 5th year. And they say, even if you make it to 10 years, there's no guarantees after that. So it's a tough business. And, the successful operators that, that's why the chains, they have scale and scope and they're able to survive. But the independent one-off restaurant has got a real tough road to hoe.
No doubt about it.
And long hours.
Yeah. So we talked about recession and prices. Those are certainly 2 significant headwinds that could hit end of this year or earlier. Anything else out there that's looming?
Well, we know that in addition to labor challenges, capacity constraints. We also have the geopolitical fallout, right? We have the Ukraine-Russian war. We don't know where that's going to wind up. I mean, you would think saner heads would prevail, but it's just not rational as to what's going on over there. And I'm not trying to take sides in a political situation, but it is what it is. And looking at this mess that's over there, and I feel sorry for all the people that are, having to go through this and lose lives and family members and stuff, but it's really a concern as to where it's going to go from here. It's already affecting us economically, morally, but what's going to happen further on that hopefully it doesn't escalate to something worse than where it is right now.
Yeah, it's a real slap in the face.
I would agree. And it's interesting, this particular skirmish over there is interesting because it's beginning to prove out that physical war is not the answer. There are just too many ripple effects, including those on the attacking country, on the aggressor.
Yes.
That, conventional war may have outlived its usefulness for expansion, which would be a wonderful thing. We'll see. Yes.
I mean, it's just, who would ever have thought that something like this would happen, especially with the way that the technology is advanced. We already had nuclear options, but hopefully that never comes to fruition. But with all this smart technology, it's amazing that a country like Ukraine is able to weather and withstand this onslaught by such a strong, powerful military, which has been exposed a bit, according to what you read. And plus the fact that you have to look at the will of the people, and I'm sure the aggressor, the attackers in this, some of those soldiers are wondering what the heck they're doing there and what they're fighting for, whereas the defenders really have that nationalistic bond as to defending their homeland. So it makes it tough. And again, I don't like to get too much involved in the politics. I like to leave that all to Lou. He does a better job at it.
Well, being that you brought that up, I'm going to address that. This morning in the news was the first time that nitrous oxide missiles were used today. And it's very toxic and can kill. So it seems as though it's just another escalating step that has been taken. And frankly, I don't think this is a political issue. I think it's well, I'm going to say it. It's the mind of a madman.
Well, it's interesting, Lou, because it does affect the mood of this country and the concerns in manufacturing. For instance, fuel costs. Where are they going to go? It's the number one expense for a lot of companies across this country. So it's a valid point. It isn't political. It's really economic.
That's right.
Well,
and to give you
humanitarian as well, right?
Absolutely. And to give you an insight with regards to the London Metal Exchange, a month or more ago, nickel was selling on the LME at $12,000 a ton. And they stopped trading nickel 2 weeks ago when it reached $125,000 a ton. It's now down to about $90,000 a ton. And the likelihood is that it's going to stay elevated. They may never see $12,000 a ton again. And that's all part of the speculators and the gougers. So nickel, which is in, and now I'm into the metals side, nickel is in nickel alloys, and it's in, some of it's in titanium, and certainly in stainless steel. And those three elements are very much part of here in the United States in our product list of items that maintain those alloys. So prices could stay up there.
That's a good point. And when we have this type of inflation and material shortages, and it's like a perfect storm on the pricing side of things. And it's not, as we know, even when prices come down, they still stay elevated from their origin of where the baseline was. So it's why we have inflation the way we do it, the way we do over the years.
Well, Anthony, I would not want to be in the supply chain as a supply chain manager at this point in time. I realize it's been elevated to a C-suite position in many companies, and it's really a very interesting area to work. Right now, it's got to be chaos from one end to the other.
Well, it has been. Think about it, having to develop alternate supply routes and alternate sources of supply over the past few years, and especially in recessionary type periods like we had in 2008, 2009, the supply management professional was paramount for many enterprises in order to keep costs in line and keep the continuity of supply. So it's definitely become more sophisticated over the years and more valuable and recognized within various companies. And it just, to your point, Tim, I'm just speaking further to your point. It's a tough job, but it's also a very rewarding job, and that's why they have skilled people in there doing it.
And that's the value of the Institute for Supply Management, who offers many, many educational courses for your supply chain expertise. We encourage you to go to ismworld.org. Anthony, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Other than just to say that as much as we have all these impediments and challenges that we're all dealing with, that things still look good for this sector. And I think we'll continue, as I mentioned earlier, this incremental growth going forward. And if any of the headwinds come into play, we probably won't see that till probably the latter part of the year.
Very good. Well, appreciate the monthly update. We certainly will look forward to having you back next month when you give us the report on April. And while people are out surfing the web, a couple of places to go, ismworld.org, where you can get a copy of this report, and jacketmediaco.com, where you can find all of our podcasts, including this one. And thanks for listening to this live broadcast of Manufacturing Talk Radio.